There's an explanation people reach for when someone shuts them out completely: no words, no eye contact, days of silence after a conflict. They tell themselves the other person is just bad at conflict. Overwhelmed. Emotionally immature. Need space to cool down. Common sense treats the silent treatment as a communication failure, an accident of poor emotional skills. The neuroscience and behavioral research tell a very different story. Functional brain imaging shows that being deliberately excluded activates the same neural regions as physical pain. And research on how the silent treatment is actually used in relationships shows something more unsettling: it is frequently not an accident at all. It is a tool. And it works exactly the way it's meant to. Here's what the research actually shows. Reason 1. Being frozen out registers in your brain as physical injury. In a landmark 2003 study published in the journal Science, neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA used fMRI imaging to study what happens in the brain during social exclusion. Participants played a simple ball-tossing game and were then deliberately left out by the other players. The result was striking. The brain's anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that activates during physical pain, lit up during exclusion. The brain does not clearly distinguish between the pain of a broken bone and the pain of being shut out. This is why the silent treatment doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It registers, physiologically, as an injury. Common sense treats it as an emotional overreaction to be managed. Your nervous system treats it as an attack to survive. When someone goes silent on you and your body responds with real distress, a tight chest, racing thoughts, an overwhelming urge to fix it, that is not oversensitivity. That is your brain accurately processing pain. Reason 2. In many cases, the silence is not overwhelm. It's strategy. Social psychologist Kipling Williams has spent over 3 decades studying ostracism, the deliberate exclusion and ignoring of another person. His research, spanning hundreds of studies, identifies ostracism as one of the most powerful tools of social control available to human beings, precisely because it requires no explanation and leaves no obvious evidence of harm. Williams' work distinguishes between 2 very different uses of silence: time needed to self-regulate, and silence deployed specifically to punish, control, or regain power in a relationship. The second kind is not disorganized. It is often calculated, sometimes consciously, sometimes through a well-practiced pattern the person has used their entire life to win conflicts without ever having to engage in one. The signal that separates the two is simple: regulation has an endpoint that gets communicated. Punishment doesn't. If the silence continues with no acknowledgement, no timeline, and no resolution, while you are left entirely responsible for guessing what you did wrong, you are not witnessing someone regulate their emotions. You are witnessing a tactic. Reason 3. Relationship science has a name for this, and it predicts relationship failure with striking accuracy. Psychologist John Gottman, after decades observing thousands of couples in his research lab, identified stonewalling, emotionally withdrawing and shutting down communication during conflict, as one of what he calls the 4 horsemen, the communication patterns most predictive of relationship breakdown. Gottman's research found that stonewalling is rarely about the withdrawing partner being calm. Physiological monitoring during these episodes shows the opposite: heart rates elevated, stress hormones spiking. But instead of engaging, the person disengages entirely, leaving their partner to manage the conflict alone, with no partner left to actually resolve it with. The partner on the receiving end is left holding all the emotional labor of the relationship, in real time, with no one participating opposite them. Over enough repetitions, Gottman's research found this pattern alone reliably predicts separation, not because one big fight went wrong, but because one person is repeatedly left to face conflict completely alone. Reason 4. The not knowing is the mechanism, and it is more powerful than anger would be. If someone yelled at you, you would know exactly what was happening. The silent treatment removes that clarity entirely. You don't know if this is over in an hour or a week. You don't know what you're being punished for, or whether you're allowed to ask. This uncertainty activates the same psychological mechanism behind intermittent reinforcement, the principle, established in foundational behavioral research, that unpredictable reward and punishment produce far stronger behavioral conditioning than consistent, predictable patterns. When you don't know when the silence will end, or what will end it, your brain doesn't relax into acceptance. It escalates into hypervigilance, replaying the conflict, apologizing preemptively, trying every possible approach to restore contact. This isn't weakness. It is a well-documented response to unpredictable social punishment, and it is precisely what keeps a person locked in orbit around someone who has gone silent. Reason 5. Repeated exposure to this pattern rewires how safe you feel asking for anything. Research on the long-term effects of chronic ostracism, including Williams' extended studies, shows that repeated exclusion produces measurable psychological consequences, diminished self-esteem, chronic anxiety around relationships, and a persistent, corrosive sense of not mattering. Over time, many people on the receiving end of repeated silent treatment stop bringing up problems altogether, not because the problem's resolved, but because raising them has become associated, at a nervous system level, with the threat of disappearing into someone's silence again. This is one of the most damaging long-term effects of the pattern. It doesn't just end individual conflicts through force. It slowly trains a person out of having a voice in the relationship at all. Reason 6. It is difficult to name as abuse, and that difficulty is exactly what makes it effective. Unlike yelling or overt aggression, the silent treatment leaves no visible evidence. There's no raised voice to point to, no clear moment of cruelty to describe to a friend. When you try to explain what's happening, it can sound, even to yourself, like nothing happened at all. This is precisely why researchers who study coercive control identify silence-based punishment as one of the more difficult patterns to recognize and name, even though its psychological impact, as the neuroscience shows, is real and measurable. The absence of visible harm does not mean the absence of harm. Here is what I want you to take from this. If you have spent hours, or days, replaying a conversation, trying to identify what you did wrong while someone refuses to speak to you, the distress you feel is not an overreaction. It is your brain correctly processing something that functions, neurologically, like an injury. This is not about diagnosing every silence as manipulation. Everyone occasionally needs a moment to cool down before talking. The difference research points to again and again is simple. Does the silence have a communicated purpose and an end point, or does it exist to punish you and leave you managing the relationship alone? If it's the second kind, the most effective response is not chasing the silence, not accelerating your apologies, not trying harder to fix what you may not have broken. It is naming the pattern out loud, to the person if it's safe to, and if not, at minimum to yourself and someone you trust outside the relationship. Because the moment you can name what's happening as a pattern instead of a mystery you personally failed to solve, it starts to lose the exact power it depends on to work.